Banditos, welcome to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits on this August 24th. Hard to believe that the summer vacay is almost over, but have no fear, the Dollar Bin Bandits are here to help ease you into the fall. And that being said, I'm Joe Marcello.
And I am Mike Farah.
And our third member is still on vacation. How about that?
Endless. They call that an endless vacation.
It's an endless summer for Oren. But it's okay. He is in this episode that we're about to introduce. And that is with none other than Buzz Dixon. Buzz has basically shaped our childhood. There is not one show that I have not watched in some form over the years. He has worked on everything from G.I. Joe, Transformers, Thundarr the Barbarian, Gem, yes, I even scoped out an episode or two of that, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Dungeons and Dragons, the list goes on. Oh, yeah, the G.I. Joe, the movie also, okay? Now, two things can be said here. Buzz has had an amazing career. He's worked on everything that we have watched over the years. And I watched way too much television growing up. But that being said, great interview.
Yeah, hats off to you too. This is a Mike's Missing episode. I was sad to miss it. Even more sad now that we're going down the list of credits that Buzz has. I will bring up one that Joe has not, which is the Garbage Pail Kids. I mean, how could you not love the Garbage Pail Kids? Especially when you were the age we were when that came out. Mm-hmm. Just craziness. But yeah, all his other stuff. My Little Pony, the movie, I'll bring that up for the pony heads, the bronies maybe out there. So, you know, a little bit for everyone. Let's get to it. This is Buzz Dixon.
I'll start first with your comic career, and then we'll move into animation, even though I think I'm going in reverse order. But one comic that you worked on that really has such a cool cult following is Destroyer Duck.
Yeah.
It's a comic that, you know, every time I'm online or somewhere, I see people talking about it. It has sort of a life on its own. How did that all sort of come together with you and Mr. Gerber?
Well, I knew Steve from Ruby Spears because we were working there together. I actually was on staff at Ruby Spears maybe a couple of weeks before Steve joined, though Steve came in as an editor and I was just the staff writer. And we struck it off well at the very beginning. We became friends. And he was doing Destroyer Duck as part of what he called FOOG, Friends of Old Gerber. And what he was trying to do was raise money for his lawsuit against Marvel. He was trying to recover the rights to Howard the Duck. And of course, Marvel, being Marvel, was fighting him on this. And he came up with Destroyer Duck and recruited Jack Kirby to help him with it because, you know, basically, if you were to have said to Jack and Roz at that time, you know, hey, how would you like to take a baseball bat to Marvel? They would have gone. You know, so they were working together on that, and I was peripheral to that. I was seeing what they were doing, and I was talking with them about it, but I wasn't actively involved until I think issue 3, maybe issue 4. And Steve, you know, God love him. I'm not being unfair or unkind when I say Steve had deadline issues on occasion. And he was trying to get both scripts for Ruby Spears done and the script for Destroyer Duck done. And he said to me, could you write a 2-page fight scene for Jack to draw while I'm finishing the rest of the book? And he says, it's basically Destroyer lawyer. They've just tried to kill him, but he successfully ejected out of his car before the bomb went off. And I just need you to have a fight scene between him and this other guy where he wins at the end. And that's all you need to do. So I thought, well, if it's going to be a guy named Destroyer Lawyer, how do I have a fight? So I went through a legal dictionary and found all the legal terms that sounded like sound effects. So in the fight scene, there's every punch is a legal word. I wrote this 2-page script, gave it to Jack. Jack drew it. And as I told people, my comics career started with Jack Kirby and it's been downhill ever since.
So was that the first time you ever worked on a comic book?
It was the first time I ever worked, professionally on a comic book. I think I noodled around some ideas on my own for comic books. I had written a horror parody of Archie comics at some point, but I honestly can't remember if it was before this or after this, but it never, I never showed it to anybody. I wrote this thing up and then I went, who's interested in this, and just put it aside.
Now, were you a comic fan growing up?
Not as big a comic fan as I was a science fiction and monster fan. I would say the way I got into science fiction was that as a little kid, I was interested in monster movies. I mean, not monster movies, dinosaurs. And from that of course leads you to dinosaur movies. I would get Donald Duck comic books because I liked, Carl Barks's work as a kid. Who didn't, and my grandmother and aunt would typically, when they would come to visit, bring me Donald Duck comic books. But the first time my father gave me a dime at a magazine stand and said, buy whatever comic book you want, I look over there and screw Uncle Scrooge. There's Rick Hunter, Time Master, being threatened by dinosaurs. And I'm going, yeah, that one. And so I liked comic books as a form. I wasn't a fan in the sense that I became a fan of science fiction, because the dinosaur movies led me to science fiction movies. Science fiction movies led me to reading science fiction. Reading science fiction led me into science fiction fandom. And I got heavily involved in fandom because my family moved a lot when I was growing up. I lived in 20 different houses by the time I graduated high school. I mean, we used to joke we moved once a year just to stay in practice. And as a result, fandom gave me friends who were never any further away than the mailbox. So fandom for me gave me a lot of connections, and I'm still connected with some of these people. I mean, I was looking at an old fanzine from the 1960s the other day, 1970s the other day, and son of a gun, one of the guys that I'm friends with on Facebook, he was a contributor to it. So it stuck. Yes, I was interested in comics, not to the same degree, and I wasn't as interested in superhero comics as I was in a broader spectrum of comics. I liked comics based on movies. I liked funny animal comics. The Dell Gold Key quasi science fiction comics like Space Family Robinson, Kona, Monarch of Monster Isle. That was my all-time favorite, because whenever you've got a caveman with a machine gun fighting mutant dinosaurs, sign me up. That's where I want to be. But that's how I got into it. Yeah.
Okay. Now, do you still have some of these comics that you grew up with?
The originals, very few, because I generally tend to read them to shreds, but I do have a few back issues. Funny you should bring that up, because you just reminded me of something. There's a comic book shop in the San Fernando Valley that was just a couple of blocks from where I lived. And Warren Jaycox is he was at the time the manager of that shop. He now owns his own comic shop called Galaxy of Comics. But one day back in the 90s, I'm in the shop and he looks at me and he said, Buzz, did you ever own a Classics Illustrated comic on the House of Seven Gables? And I went, well, yeah, now that I think of it, I did, because I bought a lot of the Classics Illustrated comics. And he pulls out this comic book that has my name on it. Somehow this thing found its way across the country into his shop. I had this thing when I was like 11 or 12 years old. Okay. And then it got bundled up and, sold with a bunch of other things. And lo and behold, the thing ended up in his shop. So
That's awesome.
yeah, crazy
That's a small
story.
world right there. So once you kind of got a taste of comics, did you like writing for comics, or was it sort of like, this
Yeah.
was nice, but so you kind of got pulled in?
Yeah, I enjoy the comics medium. When it comes to writing, I have to say comic book scripts are my favorite form of writing, because the nice thing about a comic book script is it's like an accordion. If the script is running a little short, you can stretch it out. You can add some bits of business. You can take an action scene and double the number of pages in it. If it's running too long, you can condense it down. You can take like a whole page of action and just shrink it down to a single caption after returning to town, that sort of thing. And it's very flexible that way. It forces you to think about how you're saying something, because you're limited by the number of words you can put in a panel. And I mean, it's not an absolute, but as a rule of thumb, you don't want to go over 25 words on a panel. It just forces you to think of how do you express something in the most concise way possible without making it just repetitious declarative sentences. Yeah.
How far ahead did you plot some of your stories? Was it just per book, or did you have sort of an end game in mind with some of these stories that you were doing?
Well, the answer to that is it varies. I did a series of graphic novels for the Christian publishing market called Serenity.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you're familiar with those or not. Okay, if you'll hang on one moment.
Sure.
I just so happened.
There you go. Okay, cool.
This is what we did. I basically called this Archie's with an Edge, because it's the story of an unhappy girl who finds a happy ending. And these were like 90-page graphic novels about a troubled young girl. She's trying to get her life straightened out in a new school. She encounters friends who, they like her, but they won't take any gruff from her. And this thing was plotted out in my mind well until she got into college, even past college. I was planning to follow this through into her early adult life. We only ended up doing about like 16 books in the series, but I had an idea of where it was going to go, and I could have told you, if you sat me down, I could have told you the long-term arc I planned for it. On the other hand, when Steve and I were writing a 3-parter for She-Hulk, there's a Golden Age character called, I think it's the Blonde Phantom, okay? And Wheezy, I mean, we find out it's Wheezy who is, She-Hulk's legal aid in her book. And I couldn't keep the name straight. I kept calling her the Phantom Blonde. And Steve at one point said, you know what? The only way to solve this is if we create a character called the Phantom Blonde. So Wheezy's granddaughter becomes the Phantom Blonde and takes up superheroing. And we didn't plan that at the beginning. We had no intention of creating a brand new superhero and making it the granddaughter, but it's just, well, here we are. What are we going to do?
Now, do you prefer to write, like what you had with Serenity, more reality-based books and stories, or the more, I don't want to say superhero, but, larger than life character sort of stuff?
I'll phrase that this way. I believe every story should be about the most important event in a character's life, one of the character's lives, up to that point. With Serenity, because it's an ongoing story, every issue had to have her learn some new point that helps her go a little further down the road, so to speak. But every story has to be about something that's the most important thing in that person's life. You can add a fantasy element to that. I mean, you can add, galaxies smashing into each other, multiverses, all this stuff, but it still has to have that emotional resonance. The reader has to feel that this is really important, because otherwise it's just a series of drawings of characters doing things. It's not really a story. In my more recent writing, the prose writing I've been doing, I have been leaning into what you would call realistic scenarios. I mean, these are stories that are not science fiction, not fantasy. They involve people in real identifiable communities doing real identifiable things. And they're all completely off the wall, because what happens is something happens to throw the normal balance of things off kilter. And by the time they finally get everything under control again, they've gone through all kinds of, weird outrageousness. So as much as I like science fiction, fantasy, superheroes, funny animals, it's not the thing that motivates me. The emotion is the thing that motivates me.
And I think what you say is spot on, because with She-Hulk from the original series, which just sort of had her as, as they said, the savage She-Hulk, the series you worked on really humanized her. And I think that's the one that fans really gravitated so much towards, because it, you got to see into her life. This was just someone dealing with, these powers and all that's going on in her life. And I really, hats off to you guys who worked on that, because I think that book, I see so many people going back to it now because it stood out so much from the crowd back then.
Yeah. Well, we had talked about that when I was at Stan Lee Media about, we were trying to develop new superheroes. And I said, what about superheroes that are extremely limited? I said, what if you've got like a superheroine who can fly, but the problem is she can only get 50 feet above the ground. Well, now you've got to find things for her to do 50 feet above the ground. And, she's great for getting cats out of trees. She's wonderful for delivering pizzas to somebody on the second floor. If a building's on fire, she gets there before the fire department. Anybody up to the third floor, she can help. She can bring them down. But that's the limitation for her. It's the 50-foot limit. She-Hulk, how does this person survive? I mean, how do they live when they're not out superheroing? And and you counterbalance that with, and I'm using the term here, absurdity, not to denigrate the genre, but just to illustrate a point. Sometimes you just embrace the absurdity. You've got a scenario, a situation, and you look at it and you think about it and go, realistically, this is ridiculous, but this is the world we're going to deal with. We have to play through. So She-Hulk, it's like, okay, she's a lawyer. That's how she makes her living, but the superhero world keeps barging in on her and causing problems. And when we wrote our 3-parter, she was frustrated that she had to deal with all this nonsense. There were other things she wanted to do. When I was a kid, when I say kid, under 12, the one superhero book I gravitated towards heavily was Superboy, because the Superboy books tended to be the most off-the-wall stuff in the world. He'd get exposed to red kryptonite, all this stuff. I mean, I'm a red kryptonite fan. I love red kryptonite. You can't write a boring red kryptonite story in my mind. And I love the crazy things that would happen. My favorite red kryptonite story is the one where Superman grows a beard and he goes on television and he tells Metropolis, he said, I've grown this, and this is before the hippie era, okay? He's grown this big bushy beard. He goes on TV. I said, I've been exposed to red kryptonite. I've grown a beard. They'll figure out my super identity, my secret identity, unless every man in Metropolis grows a beard tonight. And so overnight, everybody grows a big beard. I love that. It's absurd, but Superman is absurd. So just go with it. Have fun.
When you get to Marvel, you sort of get yourself, you start to see, you know, how the big companies are working and stuff like that. What are some of the takeaways that you got from working there?
Well, I never worked in the offices. I was always a freelancer at Marvel Comics. I worked even at Marvel Studios in Los Angeles. I worked as a freelancer. The basic takeaway was that they had a much looser approach to writing than I was used to. It wasn't impossible to work with, but you know, generally they said, give us a 3-page outline and then we'll send you Xeroxes of the art and you write the dialogue in. So Steve was very helpful in teaching me, you know, the basics of how to figure out where dialogue goes, how things fit in. The Marvel method doesn't preclude a writer from saying something like, I would like on this page for every panel to be, you know, 9 identical size panels. Mm-hmm. But it does allow the artist a tremendous amount of leeway in interpreting the story, in showing the story. I think it was Steve Grant who said he once got back a story that he had written. I think it was like a time travel story with the X-Men in it or something. They'd gone to the French Revolution. I may be wrong in the details, but in any case, they've gone back to the French Revolution. And in the middle of the story, there's a panel with a dinosaur in it. And he calls the artist up and he says, what's the dinosaur doing here? And the guy said, just felt like drawing a dinosaur. What are you going to do? You know,
yeah, why not?
Exactly. You know,
now,
so I got to say, you know, now that I think about it, a dinosaur running loose during the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, that's an interesting story.
It writes itself. Mm-hmm. Now, I think I saw somewhere that, now my friend has an obsession with this comic, so I said I'd ask, did you work on...
Before you ask, I'm going to guess what this is going to be, okay? NFL SuperPro?
Yes.
I get more questions about that, believe it or not.
It's just one of those curiosity comics that came out that I think folks of my generation, it was pushed on us at the comic shops. That's why it's so dear to my heart, because I remember store owners saying, oh, you're going to want this one. This is, you know, going to be worth a lot of money. How did you get involved, and what did you think of a football player crime fighter? I was talking to Steve, and it was during hiatus season in animation, which means it was productions on the old shows had stopped and they hadn't bought new shows yet. I was talking to Steve and I was saying, do you know anybody who's looking for freelancers writing in comics? Mm-hmm. You know, I'd like to pick up a little work there. And he said, well, you ought to try Bob Budiansky over at Marvel. And so I called Bob up and I introduced myself and I said, Steve suggested I call you. And I said, I'm looking for freelance work. And he says, well, you know, I really don't have anything. And then almost as an aside, he says, do you know anything about football? And I said, well, I played football for 4 years in high school. And he said, you did? He says, where are you? And I said, well, I'm at home. He says, don't go anywhere. So 15 minutes later, he calls back and he says, we've got this book, NFL SuperPro. Would you like to write it? And I said, sure. You know, and he says, great. He says, just for your information, you're the only person anybody at Marvel knows who ever played football. So I got the job from being a mediocre football player when I was a teenager. But again, it was embrace the absurdity. One of the things about the book, and I'm not saying this to run down anybody who worked on it, so please don't misconstrue it. Mm-hmm. But I think there were a total of 3 writers on it, and each of us had a radically different approach to the character and how to tell the story. And I just looked at it as, this is absurd. You know, a superhero football player. It's nuts. Okay, that's the tone then. We're in a world where superhero football players are the norm. And I just dove into it that way. I tended to be a little satirical with the things that I wrote, because I thought, well, you know, we might as well have fun with this. And I got the Hopi Indian tribe pissed off at me because we did one
where there were twin sisters, Hopi twin sisters, and one was like an international ice skating champion, and the other was heavily involved in Hopi politics. And I actually did a fair amount of research on this. Now, I'll qualify this by saying, when I wrote this in the 1990s, I was writing it with clean intent. I was not writing it to make fun of anybody or denigrate anything. In retrospect, it wasn't my story to tell, if you know what I mean. If faced with a similar challenge, I don't think I would have done this particular story this particular way. But I did research into Hopi tribal politics, and very generally, the Hopi tribe is divided between what they call the hostiles and the friendlies. And the hostiles are the ones who want nothing to do with the rest of the country. Just stay outside of our lives, please. Just go away. And the friendlies are the ones who say, well, no, we've got to deal with the rest of the country. We've got to make some amends off of this. I also did a lot of research into the Kachinka system. And the Kachinka religion is sometimes called a doll religion or a clown religion, and that's a very inaccurate description. But they do have these figures that are iconic representations of certain things in their life. And it's probably the only religion in existence that has an ever-expanding pantheon, because every time something new gets introduced, they will incorporate it into the Kachinka pantheon. They actually have now white tourists with camera Kachinkas who interrupt Kachinka ceremonies, because as they're doing the formal ceremonies, these Kachinkas dressed as tourists will come through taking pictures, because that's the reality, okay? Right. And so I was writing about this. I made some effort to understand the Kachinka belief system, because it did play something important in the story. And the one big stretch that I did was that I put a tribal casino into the story. The Hopi do not have casinos, and they were absolutely right to criticize me for that. And they did not like that. They sent a rather sternly written letter to Marvel saying, we don't want, we don't like this. We demand you do something about it. And Marvel said, we promise you within 30 days, that book will be off the stands.
Well,
so, to any Hopi who may be listening, sincere apologies. It was not meant with ill intent, but I understand your point of view. You're absolutely right. Never again. Promise.
Well, you made a mark on that book.
Yeah. If it had been the Apache, I might have been worried.
There you go. Now, I want to jump now to animation, because that's the coolness level that you did comics and animation. And it's animation that was part of not only my life growing up, but so many of my friends' lives. Just to read off to the people listening, some of the shows you worked on: Plastic Man, Heathcliff, Thundarr the Barbarian, Alvin the Chipmunks, Dungeons and Dragons, Mr. T, Gem, Chippendales Rescue Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman the Animated Series, and for me personally, G.I. Joe and Transformers as well. Basically like a who's who of cartoons that raised a generation. Do you ever look back at your career and just say, wow, like, look at all that I was a part of?
I honestly do on occasion. I have had encounters with people who were fans at a Transformers convention a few years ago. One of the people running it told me, literally with tears coming to his eyes, how he, as a child, he had grown up in a very poor household, and he would hurry home to watch Transformers, because Transformers was like the one bright spot, the one thing. And his parents scrimped and saved and bought him for Christmas a midline Transformer figure. They couldn't afford the very best, but they got him one in the mid-range, and that was the most their family could afford. And it was the best present he ever had, and it was this great toy, and he loved it. And I was listening to it and I was thinking, wow, we did our job well if that's the memories that we created, if those are what people took away from it. And I'm very happy. I'm always gratified to hear from fans who say they read something or saw something and were deeply impressed by it. I think with very few exceptions, and those exceptions all had something to do with the process, not the finished product. I have fond memories of everything that I worked on. Of the list you just gave, for correction's sake, I want to point out I didn't write Plastic Man. I wrote Mighty Man and Yuck.
Okay.
That was part of the Plastic Man show. Mm-hmm. And I never wrote a Heathcliff, but I did write Dingbat and the Creeps, which was also part of the Heathcliff show. I have, I don't know when this will run, but not this upcoming Friday. No, excuse me. I stand corrected. This Friday, son of a gun.
There you go.
This Friday, there will be a piece on my blog called Better It Befell Q*bert Than Optimus Prime. And I will tell about how we came within an eye blink of getting Transformers at Ruby Spears and why it's probably just as well we didn't.
Wow. So something for folks to look forward to. We'll definitely put the link in the description. One thing, looking at this list, and I was a huge G.I. Joe fan myself, that always struck me, and it strikes me now more as a dad and, an adult, these shows never talk down to children. You never dumbed things down. You never made it silly, and you never went way over their heads either. It was a show that, spoke to them intelligently, told a story. And I think that's really what, made them so special to so many people. Was that something that you guys planned? Like you looked at other cartoons and said, no, we don't want to do this. This is how we want to handle things.
Absolutely. I would have to say the spiritual grandfather of everything we did was probably Johnny Quest. And Johnny Quest, people today have no idea what kind of an impact Johnny Quest made on kids when I was growing up, because for the first time, it wasn't funny animals. It wasn't talking down. It was just a straightforward adventure story, classic pulp adventure story. And it really resonated with kids. I mean, we really liked that show because it wasn't a step down. It was hardcore, so to speak. Not violent and gruesome, but it did not shrink from its premise. It followed through on everything it did. And when we were doing G.I. Joe and Transformers, the same rules applied. It was just, we're not treating the kids as idiots. We're not treating them as, they need to have things sugar-coated for them. I'll give you a counterpoint. One of the very few shows that I had, I do not have fond memories of working on. There was a show called The Little Clowns of Happy Town, which had been created by a group that claimed they could create the perfect nonviolent TV show. And their show was so nonviolent that the clowns could not throw pies at one another. They could put a pie on the ground, and then another clown walking along could trip and fall into the pie, but they couldn't throw the pie. That was violent. And writing for that was like pulling teeth. I did it as a favor to the two story editors, Cheryl Scarborough and Katie Cooch, who had worked with me at Ruby Spears and were friends of mine, and they needed help because it was a damn difficult show to write for because of the restrictions on it. And I didn't make their life easier because I kept trying to sneak in Uncle Pennywise jokes, and they're going, Buzz, stop it with the Stephen King references. Get out. In fact, the only time we wrote over somebody's head would be when we would sneak something back past the network. We drop in a line or a gag or something, or if not the network, Hasbro or something like that. I threw in a few references in the trailer that if those in the know are going, H.S. Thompson Pharmaceuticals, you know, things like that. And sometimes we got away with it, sometimes we didn't. But
I was gonna say, with a show like that, who is the one that is putting these barriers up? Is it the network? Is it the people who own the rights to the property, or a combination of both?
well, you'll want to read this post then, because I go into that. With broadcast television, the networks don't want to lose money, and they basically don't want anything on the air that will cause them to lose money. And so they will second guess everything, and they will remove stuff that we know will work because they're afraid somebody might take offense at it. And being creatives, we're saying, well, let the 2 or 3 people who are going to take offense. Everybody else is going to like it. Then you also have, past them, you also have the producer who has his own ideas of what he wants or doesn't want. And sometimes when you have someone like Lou Scheimer, Lou was excellent at communicating to the writing staff, to the art staff, look, this is the box that Filmation comes in. We don't go outside of this. We don't do gruesome, we don't do violent, we don't do this stuff. Everything you do, if it fits in the box, that's fine, but don't go outside the box. And so you knew that starting work, that those were the limits, those were the boundaries you had. And you could do good work for Filmation, because Filmation really encouraged good writing, because they sure couldn't afford good animation. You know, and yeah, if you could write a good script that had a big part for Norm Prescott, you know, but they emphasize good writing. And Ruby Spears liked good writing, but Joe and Ken had created Scooby-Doo. Joe, it was one of the wildest idea men that I have ever worked with. And he had lots of ideas. And believe me, if I'm saying somebody had a goofy idea, that's saying something. And Joe would frequently throw things in that you would have to incorporate, that you're going, Joe, why in the world this? I mean, Joe's parents came to visit one time. They came, I think, from the Midwest to visit him in Los Angeles, and he's given them a tour through the studio, and he's walking them through the writers and the artists and everything. And of course, when he comes in, we're all saying, hi, nice to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Ruby. Why didn't you buy Joe a dog when he was a kid? Because we had to have a dog in every damn thing we did. I mean, it was just like, you know, every show had to have a dog in it, you know, and it's like, for God's sakes, Joe, find another pet, you know. Yeah. But so yeah, we just wrote from our hearts. We wrote saying, what would we have loved to have seen when we were 9 years old, when we were 12 years old? And that's what we wrote.
Makes sense. One thing I'm always fascinated by when I watch these cartoons, and especially ensemble cartoons where there's a lot of different characters, how as a writer do you pick and choose what characters to use for specific episodes?
Well, that was one of the great things about Transformers and G.I. Joe. And for that matter, My Little Pony as well, and Jim. We had large casts that we could choose from. And unlike, I'll give an example, the Mr. T show at Ruby Spears, we were not obligated to include every character in every episode. Basically, Hasbro said, as long as every character gets, you know, some screen time at some point, you don't have to have them all in every episode, which, you know, for G.I. Joe with 82 characters, that was a relief. But the nice thing about it was you could write any kind of a story you want. You'd come up with a story idea and you'd go, well, you know what? This is going to be kind of a goofy off the wall story. It's going to be a shipwreck story. He's going to be in the middle of it. We've got something a little spooky, a little edgy, Low Light. This is his kind of a story. He goes into this one. You know, the Sarge, oh my God, it was a gold mine. I mean, you could plug him into a lot of stuff. And any story you wanted to do, you could find the perfect character to tell that story with in the ensemble cast. Now, for Transformers, it was a similar situation. Any story you wanted to tell, you could find a Transformer. But on the other hand, my motivation was every time I write a script with jazz in it, I get to hang out all day with Scatman Crothers. So that was my motivation there.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
How do you, it's kind of a strange question, not the voice of the character, but the personality of the character. Was that something that you guys put together yourself, or did Hasbro from the comic books, or did the companies say, we'd like this guy to be, you know, maybe more of a gruff, tough guy, and this guy could be a little, you know, more lighthearted?
We started with the character bios that Larry Hama wrote. Larry wrote these bios for the backs of the cards. And as I recall, they were about 2 to 3 times longer than the actual printed bios on the back. They were more detailed than what you got on the card. But Hasbro wisely kept everything that he wrote and sent that to us as the series Bible. So we had good basic ideas for who all these characters were. But as I tell people, the advantage of being on the original writing staff of Joe and Transformers and these other things was you'd be writing a script and you'd go, is Roadblock a Rhodes Scholar? He is now. And, you know, you could change things, you could add stuff. And everybody who came after us, they were stuck by the decisions that we had made and, you know, trapped by them. We would take a certain amount of advantage. Steve said that I was the first one to figure out how to write Shipwreck. And that is, you write him like Popeye, you play him like Jack Nicholson. And the moment we did that, that unlocked Shipwreck for everybody else, but it really wasn't 100% of what Larry had created. Larry gave us the basic template, but we figured out what the syntax and speech rhythms and everything else was by mashing up Popeye and Jack Nicholson. So that's how that character evolved. That's how he grew and became a personality. He also, I had been in the Army for 6 years, and one of the reasons I had been hired on Joe was that having some military experience, I could help give the series a patina of realism. Right. And we've got goofballs, we've got oddballs, we got guys that are just, you know, screwy as you can imagine. And we had too many competent people in G.I. Joe. And I said, we need to have one guy that's just the screw up. And that was Shipwreck. But he's a survivor. One of the points that I bring out in a story that I wrote that never got aired, The Most Dangerous Man in the World, one of the points is he's like Eli Wallach in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. No matter what you throw at him, he will survive it. He is a complete screw up in everything else. You can't trust him. But if you're in a combat situation, you stick close to him because he'll get through it. He'll get you out of there. You know, and so he's the guy that you want on your team. You just don't necessarily want to hang around with him when he's not fighting Cobra.
Now, speaking of all the characters and stuff like that, do the voice actors or the actors doing the voices, have there ever been occasions where what's coming out is not matching in your head how you wrote it?
Yeah, on more than a few occasions.
Okay.
Most of the time, you know, you've got the character in your head and you hear the voice actor doing it a different way and you just go, well, okay, that's the way it's going to be done then, you know, and we go with that. In some cases where we had one voice actor doing 2 or 3 characters, they had to be very careful to make each voice distinct. And so they would out of necessity, change the way we might have heard the character in our heads, because he would have to sound different on camera. Other times it was technical things. When I wrote G.I. Joe the movie, I had for Cobra La, I had this battle cry, and I had based it on a scene in the movie Lawrence of Arabia. If you've seen the movie, early in the movie, the Ottoman Air Force attacks this Bedouin camp. And there are these Bedouin women standing on the top of a mountain, acting as their early warning system. And as they see the Turkish Air Force approaching, they turn around and they issue this unearthly, high-pitched trilling sound as like living sirens to warn the camp. And I thought, well, that'll be good. We can incorporate that into the battle cry. It's Cobra, la, 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 and this really high-pitched sound. And so I wrote the screenplay, and I wrote everything that had to do with Serpentor before, now I'm drawing a blank, I'm trying to remember his name. The guy who played Serpentor.
The voice actor?
Yeah, the voice actor. I'll remember in a minute. I apologize. He's no longer with us. I apologize. I had it right on the tip of my tongue and it vanished. Dick Gottlieb. I wrote all that stuff, and others wrote Serpentor before he was cast. Mm-hmm. He was great as Serpentor, but the thing was, he had a voice 4 octaves too low for that. So we're sitting in the recording studio, recording the dialogue for G.I. Joe the movie, and he goes, Cobra, la, 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 la. And I go, whoa, stop, no. Give me 5 minutes, I'll come up with a better battle cry. This is not going to work. And they go, it's fine, go ahead, just go ahead and do it. I said, no, please, let me come up with a better battle cry. And they just went ahead with it. So, I mean, Cobra La also, I mean, I've made my peace with this, but when I was writing the outline, we were talking about it comes from some lost civilization, and I called it as a placeholder name Cobra La. And I tell writers now, if you're going to use a placeholder name, never use a placeholder name that you can't live with. Either that or come up with something you absolutely can't use, like Festering Monkey Hemorrhoid Island. Just something you absolutely cannot use, because otherwise you will get stuck with something you don't like. And Hasbro fell in love with Cobra La, and I said, no, we can't use it. It's a direct steal off of Shangri-La, the most famous lost civilization in literature. No, let me come up with a better name. We like this fine, there we are.
I'm sorry, but as a G.I. Joe fan, as a kid growing up, the fact that you wrote this movie, that to me was like the biggest thing to happen in my lifetime. Like when it is like, oh guys, it's coming off the TV, it's gonna be in movie theaters, and we can't believe what's gonna happen. My friend had one question about the film. He read a rumor that Duke was supposed to die in the film, but
I killed that sucker dead.
That is true.
I killed him dead.
But there was a pushback because of Transformers.
Well, I'll give you the full story. They were, at the time, they did not realize how deeply these characters resonated with kids. And they thought, we can just push old characters out and introduce new ones every couple of months, have a constantly upgraded product line. And no, you can't do that, especially with your primary characters. So they told us we're going to be introducing a bunch of new characters in G.I. Joe the movie, and we're going to be getting rid of a bunch of old ones. I had to fight tooth and nail to get Shipwreck in just for the short amount of time he's in the movie, because they didn't want to use Shipwreck anymore. So Duke was one of the characters we were going to cycle out. And I said, well, look, we've been doing a war comic, a war cartoon for a couple of years now, and we've never officially killed anybody. We've made reference to casualties, but we never actually came out and said somebody got killed. I said, how about for the movie, since it's in theaters, we let Duke go out heroically, sacrificing himself to save somebody. And they said, oh, that's great. Yeah, write that up. So I write it up, and they loved it. They liked it. And they told the guys writing the Transformers movie, kill off Optimus Prime, because we're going to cycle him out too. Now, two things. First off, Optimus Prime is a robot, and you can do anything you want to a robot because you can repair it. You can run him over with a steamroller. You can smash him into a bunch of bits. You can melt him down. You can always fix him and put him back. And that's exactly what happened, because they realized kids want Optimus Prime. Okay. Human beings, you kill them, you cannot bring them back, not in reality. I think this this trope of killing off characters and then miraculously bringing them back, this has become way too overused. I want to see some dead characters stay dead. Okay. But anyway, we write the movie, we storyboard it. You watch it, it is clear he dies. I mean, he gets a snake lance right through the heart. He bites the big green weenie. I killed him dead. And then the Transformer movie comes out. Now, G.I. Joe was aimed at a 12-year-old audience, and the Transformers were aimed at a 9-year-old audience. And it's a crucial difference, because a 12-year-old, you can drop him off at the theater and come back for him 2 hours later. A 9-year-old, you got to go into the movie theater with it. Okay. And I always felt sorry for these parents who had to take their 9-year-olds into this movie, because they know nothing about Transformers. They are sitting in this theater experiencing what must be like a drug flashback to the 1960s. The dialogue might as well be in High Martian for all that they can understand what is going on. And then all of a sudden, right in the middle of it, their kids start screaming and crying and just having a meltdown. And it's like, whoa, what happened? We had one kid lock himself in a closet for a couple of days, we were told. He was just so freaked out by what happened. So Hasbro said, we got to, don't kill Duke. And we can kill him. I mean, it's a different audience. At 12, you understand people die. It is a far more heroic thing than he does than what happens to Optimus Prime. Because you and I know Optimus Prime is coming back. And they said, no, put him in a coma. So they dubbed in, he's in a coma. And then at the very last minute, yay, we got a phone call. He's out of the coma. Said, no, I killed him. I killed him dead.
Can you live with the change that they made, or do you still sit there and have a hard time watching the
I live with it, because I think getting rid of Duke would have been a bad idea. I think Duke is one of the core characters. I think there are about like 6 that you couldn't eliminate without drastically undercutting what G.I. Joe is. Gotcha. And Duke made that cut.
How, because all of these, Transformers, G.I. Joe, and a lot of the other things you wrote, they always had great villains, villains that you didn't like, but at the same time, you didn't exactly hate. Like, you didn't sit there, grinding your teeth. There was still some not redeemable, but entertaining parts to them. In your estimation, how do you write a good villain?
Well, a villain has to have a recognizable motive. They need something that the audience goes, I can understand why they're doing that. And I'm leaving out here, obviously, certain more psychological stories where the mystery is, why is this character doing this thing that doesn't make any sense? And then you find out. But ultimately, the antagonist needs a motive that if you listen to it, you go, well, I can understand why somebody would want that. Now, sometimes in the case of the Dreadnoks, it's very easy to understand. These guys are brutal idiots and they like money, so they'll break the law, they'll commit crimes, they'll do all kinds of stuff as long as they get paid for it. Cobra Commander, he's an egomaniac. He wants to be on top. He wants to be in charge. He's a manipulator, a liar. He will do this, and you go, well, yeah, this is a guy motivated by power. Serpentor has a sense of entitlement. It is literally built into his DNA. He is entitled to this. He is outraged that anyone would even suggest that he is not entitled to this. And all the rest of them, they all have their individual motives. They might be mercenary. They might be, oddball characters like Dr. Mindbender, who finally finds a place where he can do all the crazy stuff he wants to do without anybody saying no to it. And you can follow their motives. You can at least grasp what's going on. When I got into animation, I railed against what I called the Super Friends type story. Mm-hmm. And this is not to denigrate anybody who likes Super Friends. Okay, I see the shirt.
Let's see what this.
But basically, to my mind, the worst kind of Super Friends story is the Joker steals the Eiffel Tower. Mm-hmm. Why? Because he just wants to steal the Eiffel Tower. Well, who does that hurt? Who misses a meal because the Eiffel Tower is stolen? Now, you can make an argument that there's, the tourist industry in France is going to take a major hit because of it. But that's a little abstract for a kid, and it's just a motive, something that even the youngest member of the audience can go, oh, the coyote's hungry. He wants to eat the Roadrunner. Or, in the Bugs Bunny cartoon, the opera singer wants to practice his opera. He doesn't care who he pisses off, and he pisses off the wrong rabbit. All this stuff, it's understandable. It's easy to express. It's easy to grasp. I was always an advocate for that always it had to be somebody's most important story.
These properties, and the ones that are attached to figures and toys and the like, do you ever get pushback from Hasbro or Mattel to put in certain characters or to push certain characters if there's a new toy or a new line coming out?
We did at the very beginning. When we started G.I. Joe, we would get sheets of paper that would say, we want an episode with the following. And they would give us 6 characters. They'd give us 3 vehicles and a couple of play sets. And play sets could be, they actually sent us one time, make sure you include the G.I. Joe sandbag set. It's a military base. You're tripping over sandbags. Don't worry about that, So they would send this list to us at the very beginning, and within about 2 or 3 weeks, they realized we don't have to send these lists. These guys will use every tool in the box. If they need something, they'll find a character or a device and they'll get it in there. Mm-hmm. Now, we would get occasionally instructions along the line of, we're not including, this toy is not in the product line anymore. You don't have to include it in stories. And since it was generally a replacement vehicle for it, that wasn't a problem, certain characters would get written out. The story where they go to an alternate reality, an alternate timeline where Cobra has won, all the Joes that stay in that timeline, they were Joes that were being cycled out of the product line. Sparks, the original communications guy, got cycled out very early on, and we brought him back as a civilian to consult with G.I. Joe in an episode just to establish continuity, just to let kids know if a character you liked isn't with G.I. Joe anymore, his term of enlistment is up. He finished his duty and he's a civilian now. So we very rarely got anything other than the occasional, we've seen too much of this character, you don't have to use him as much, or we haven't seen this character in a while, try to include him. And generally for that, if we couldn't find a story for a character, he could always be, one of the Joes in a particular squad doing something, and that satisfied Hasbro. So
that makes sense. Was there a program you worked on that maybe didn't take off like you thought it would, but you really liked working on it and thought had a great deal of potential?
I am going to embarrass myself because I won't be able to remember the name of it, but there was a proposed 65 episode Canadian science fiction series that would have been one of the best projects I ever worked on. They actually did get a 5-part miniseries up and running, and then they couldn't find the funding for the remaining 60 episodes. But they came to me, they asked me to do a script for them. It was everything that I had hoped for. I mean, complexity of characterizations. The villains weren't 100% villainous. The heroes weren't 100% heroic. And there was just an enormous amount of room for nuance and emotional depth. And I wrote the script for them, and nothing came of it. They were able to get their miniseries off the ground, and I'm happy for them for that. But they never got the series off the ground, and that was that.
Well, hey, had a good run.
Yeah.
Which did you prefer overall? I mean, I'm assuming animation, but between comics and animation, if you had to balance them out, which one creatively did you enjoy more?
That's an excellent question, and it's a little hard to answer. When, like Serenity, it's my own project, something I've created and I've packaged and shepherded through, and I hired the artist and I did the editing on it. Clearly, that is something that means more to me than any project that I worked on for someone else. On the other hand, if I could be given, the ability to have that much influence on what the final product of something looked like, yeah, I would love to do animation or live action or stage play or anything that is like that. I'm writing primarily prose, short stories and novels now. And one of the nice things about that is I write something, I send it in, they either like it and buy it, or they don't like it and they don't buy it, but they almost never ask for changes. I had other than stylistic ones. I mean, you have editors who say, no, we put the quotation marks on the outside. Okay, fine, whatever you want. I wrote a story called Minutes that is about the crew of a disabled spaceship dying one by one as their oxygen runs out. And the reason their oxygen is running out is that the guy who owns the spaceship was this egomaniac who made sure everybody had less oxygen than he did. And depending upon your rank on the crew, the less oxygen you had. Going down to his own children had only a few minutes of oxygen, because he never thought there would be a disaster where they would have to go to their oxygen tanks. And one science fiction magazine said, we love this story, but we can't kill the kids. He said, if you'll rewrite it to, so the kids don't die, we'll buy the story. And I said, that's kind of the point. This guy kills his own kids because of his ego. And so I didn't sell it to them, but I did end up eventually selling it to to an anthology, an original anthology. And it's a grim story, but it's supposed to be a grim story.
That's pretty, I like the sound of that. I think that's got a lot of potential right there.
Yeah. I have got it on the back burner of ideas that I would like to turn into stage plays, because you can do this on stage. You could act this out on stage. I like being able to express myself and not have to worry about what somebody else will say or be second guessed. This doesn't mean I write without recognizing there are certain limitations. I've got one story that is circulating right now, and without giving it away, it is the kind of story that too many writers would write in a smirky, lascivious way. Let's put it that way. They would emphasize all the, the bouncy parts, let's say. And to me, the story works only when you deliberately underplay that, only when it's presented very matter-of-factly and let the reader put in all the details they want. But if you underplay it, it becomes funny. If you talk about it explicitly, it becomes, do I really need, no, I don't like that. But if it's underplayed, if it's like, okay, this is happening and you can imagine what it looks like, it works. So I do have self-imposed limitations because I know the final effect that I want to get. And I am fully capable of writing a very, very gruesome story, and I'm fully capable of writing a very upbeat, cheery, everything sweet story, but I don't like being told change something from one to the other.
That makes sense. What project of yours or that you worked on is the nearest and dearest to your heart, that's the one that you think the most about or really had such a wonderful time on?
It would have been the Serenity books, because I had enough time to have a character demonstrate the beginnings of personal growth. I was able to do things that I thought were funny and my readership thought were funny. I was able to tackle real issues, again, bearing in mind who the stories were aimed at. I could tackle the stuff without being explicit about it, but at the same time acknowledging certain things. We were able to touch onto, sex, drugs, things like that, and do so in a way that the gatekeepers couldn't say, oh, you're encouraging that sort of thing. No, we're not encouraging it. Look at the story. The story very clearly does not present this in a positive light, but it acknowledges it's there, it exists, and kids have to deal with it. So Serenity, of all the projects, is probably near and dear to me. Of work that I did for other people, G.I. Joe is probably the high water mark. In particular, The Traitor, a 2-part episode that I did. I am proudest of that work of anything that I did, but there is no Joe that I worked on that I feel bad about. There may be individual lines of dialogue I cringe at, but there's no episode, no movie that I feel bad about. The one that got away was The Most Dangerous Man in the World, which was when I became the story editor of the 2nd season. I wanted to explain how the TV version of Cobra came about. Larry Hama, of course, had his version, but Larry, doing the comic book, was writing a separate storyline from what was going on in the show. And both Larry and us at Sunbow West, independent of one another, just made a mental decision not to look at each other's work, because we all kind of recognized it would be madness trying to sync this up. So just let Larry write the stories he wanted to write, and we would do the stories that we could do that would fit into what Hasbro wanted on screen. And so I had come up with this story, The Most Dangerous Man in the World, which was about basically the Friedrich Nietzsche of Cobra. He was the guy who came up with the operating philosophy that Cobra was based on. Cobra Commander, however, has perverted that philosophy, has corrupted it. And so this philosopher, is trying to stop Cobra Commander. Cobra Commander has him imprisoned just to keep him away from the troops. And the guy escapes from Cobra's prison. And when he does, Cobra ceases all worldwide operations and just launches a massive manhunt to find this guy. And the Joes, all they know is Cobra has stopped doing stuff, and they're looking for one guy. They have no idea who the guy is, but they just know if Cobra wants him, we have to find him first. The Joes get him first, and he's the biggest pain in the ass you could possibly imagine. And in the end, he escapes the Joes, and the Joes go, you know what? Let him go. He's out there causing trouble for Cobra. We don't care. And so I had written this and submitted it to Hasbro, and Hasbro came back. We love it. It's great. Just make sure you have a part for the Cobra Emperor in it. And said, the Cobra who? And they said, the Cobra Emperor. And I said, well, who's the Cobra Emperor? And they said, he's the guy who runs Cobra. And I said, no, he's not. We've spent an entire season telling people Cobra Commander is the supreme commander. If you had told us, hint, there may be somebody above him, we could have dropped a few hints so we could introduce somebody. We just can't drop a brand new character who outranks Cobra Commander into the story. And they go, you're right. Come up with a couple of ideas. Now, here again is another, for you writers out there, another hard-earned lesson. If a producer or publisher asks you to come up with a couple of ideas, don't. Come up with the one idea you want to do and present it to them. Because if these guys could come up with ideas, they wouldn't be hiring you. So I came up with two ideas, one of which was the basis for Arise, Serpentor, Arise, which was the second season opener miniseries. The other became G.I. Joe, the movie, which involved Cobra La. And they looked at it, they called me up and they said, great, go with it. And I said, go with which one? And they said, both of them. So if you watch Arise, Serpentor, Arise, it seems that it is entirely the doing of Cobra, the creation of Serpentor. If you see G.I. Joe, the movie, you understand that behind the scenes, Cobra La influenced Dr. Mindbender to create Serpentor. Mm-hmm. So from what I understand, Hasbro now regards G.I. Joe, the movie, as an alternate timeline story and is not part of the main G.I. Joe story universe anymore, which is fine by me. I mean, I would have preferred not to have done that. Right. I should have just offered them, Arise, Serpentor, Arise, and let it go with that.
Wow. Well, sir, I could talk to you for hours about G.I. Joe. It is so near and dear to my heart. We'd love to have you back.
I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Yeah, my friend is a huge G.I. Joe fan. But for both of us, I just want to say right now, thank you so much for all that you've done for us fans, comics and animation.
You're welcome.
A lot of people come up to you, but it really did have such an effect on our lives. And so much was because of you and the care and the time you took in the writing for that. So thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. And like I said, I am always touched to hear from fans who say how much they liked what we did. And when I got involved in science fiction fandom, the legendary EC Comics bullpen was still being talked about. And when I was a young fan, I thought to myself, I would love someday to be involved in a project where I get to work with a bunch of cool guys and we do something that people remember for a long time. I got my wish. Thank you all.
Percent.
Well,
and we're back. So I love talking to Buzz. I wanted to basically pick his brain about like every episode of every show that I've seen of his. Just because, hey, look, man, there are shows that you just have an attachment to when you're growing up. And he has pretty much worked on all of those for me. I mean, Bionic 6, who remembers that? I do. That was a great show. Okay? That was awesome. Like Mike said, Garbage Pail Kids, Chippendales Rescue Rangers. You wouldn't have the fancy movie that just out now without Buzz Dixon. So there.
Yeah. G.I. Joe, Transformers. I mean, the big two, as we probably can call it, the other big two other than Marvel and DC. I mean, how many big twos can we have? Plastic Man. At this point, we're just listing stuff he worked on, but I mean, it's just so amazing and so awesome. And you guys did another great job. I mean, it's a good gig being able to interview some of these people that made our childhood and oftentimes our adulthood into what they are. So that's it. That was Buzz Dixon, everybody. And that'll do it for this episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. Thank you for listening. Thank you for rating, reviewing, and subscribing. We love to hear your feedback. We love to hear your suggestions. So, please hit us up. All the deets are coming up in the standard outro. But for now, we will say sayonara.